Right now, millions of people are walking away from everything they've built. Well-paid careers, long-term relationships, and social networks they've spent decades forming. To outsiders, it looks like self-destruction. Yet Carl Jung predicted this more than 70 years ago. He described it as the inevitable crisis of the awakened soul. And he believed it was not collapse, but humanity's most vital form of growth. Today, I'll explain the 5 psychological reasons Jung identified for why awakened people feel compelled to step away from society. The shadow work that makes remaining impossible, and the deeper purpose he saw in this collective shift. What you're about to hear may clarify that restless discomfort you've been experiencing. Jung recognized something many overlook. When you awaken spiritually, you don't just see through society's illusions. Your entire nervous system begins to resist them. It stops being a matter of choice. It turns into a biological necessity. Your body can no longer endure what it once tolerated. Jung argued this was not a flaw in human psychology, but a built-in mechanism meant to drive humanity toward its next stage of evolution. Here's where it becomes even more striking. Jung called it the disintegration of the persona. Most people don't even realize they're wearing a mask until it starts to break. This mask, what Jung named the persona, consists of every role you've been trained to perform: the professional self, the social self, the family self. It isn't entirely false. It's adaptive. It helped you function and survive. But during spiritual awakening, something changes. You begin to recognize the mask as separate from your real identity. Suddenly, you catch yourself acting in meetings, forcing interest in small talk, showing excitement for things that feel meaningless. It's like waking up in the middle of a dream and realizing you've been moving through life unconsciously. Jung recorded numerous cases of successful individuals who reached this point and could no longer carry on as before. One patient, a respected banker, admitted, "I sit in board meetings discussing millions, and all I can think is that we're pretending any of this matters. We are all performing roles in a play no one truly wants to take part in. Yet very few dare to step off the stage." This isn't depression, it's clarity. And once you recognize the performance, it cannot be unseen. The challenge deepens, because as the false self begins to fade, society does not reward authenticity. It resists it. Colleagues notice when you stop conforming. Family members feel uneasy when you no longer reinforce old patterns. Friends distance themselves as your presence reminds them of the masks they, too, continue to wear. Jung spoke directly to this reality. The individual has always struggled against the pressure of the collective. Choosing this path often means facing loneliness and fear. Yet the cost is worth it, because the reward is true ownership of self. This ownership, what Jung called individuation, requires stepping away from environments that demand a false identity. One cannot complete psychological growth while remaining trapped in the old role. It is not about being superior or judgmental. It is about incompatibility. An awakened mind cannot function properly while forced through a false persona. It is like trying to install modern software onto outdated hardware. The system eventually fails. This collapse, however, opens the door to the second stage of transformation. This is where Jung's ideas become truly groundbreaking. Many believe awakening means becoming more positive, more enlightened, or more spiritual. Jung argued the opposite. Real awakening requires descending into the shadow, the hidden aspects of ourselves society has taught us to deny, suppress, or conceal. The difficulty is that modern culture relies heavily on shadow projection. We push our darkness outward, placing it onto others, onto rival political groups, other nations, different races, or social classes. This projection binds society together, as collective agreement on who the villains are provides a sense of unity. But once you begin integrating your shadow, everything changes. Projection stops working. You begin to see within yourself the very qualities you condemn in others. Your own greed when criticizing the wealthy, your own authoritarian impulses when resisting control, your own lack of awareness when judging those you call asleep. Jung once wrote, Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But here's what he didn't emphasize enough. When you stop projecting, you become unsettling to those who still rely on their projections. Let me give a clear example. During spiritual awakening, many people notice their own narcissistic tendencies, the parts that crave recognition, superiority, or even see enlightenment itself as an ego accomplishment. When you acknowledge this within yourself instead of projecting it onto others, you stop engaging in the competition of who appears more advanced. Yet in spiritual communities, built on subtle hierarchies of consciousness, refusing to play this game makes you appear threatening. You can't easily condemn the unconscious crowd, because you now see your own unconsciousness. You can't simply fight against the system, because you recognize how you also contribute to it, and you can't fully blame those who harmed you, because you realize the ways you've done the same to others. This isn't about excusing harmful actions. It's about understanding what Jung described as the collective shadow. All of us are involved in the very darkness we claim to resist. Once you see this, you no longer take part in society's game of projection, but society depends on scapegoats, villains, and outsiders to define itself. When you withdraw your projections, you also pull back the energy that sustains those structures. You become, in a sense, psychologically unusable to the collective. And when society senses this, it begins to reject you. Most people stop at this point. But Jung described a third transformation that shifts everything. It may sound mystical, but it is psychologically exact. Awakened consciousness does not experience time in the rigid way society demands. He referred to this as the reality of the psyche. Psychological time is not linear but circular, synchronistic and meaningful in ways that cannot be captured by the clock. Consider how modern society is organized through schedules, deadlines, long-term plans, and retirement savings. Everything assumes time is linear. Life moves from point A to point B. Progress is forward movement, and success is measured by years of accumulated achievement. But awakening shifts this perspective. One begins to experience what Jung called synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that suggest reality functions more like a web than a straight line. Past, present, and future overlap. Dreams foreshadow events. A thought of someone coincides with their unexpected call. Symbols and patterns seem to speak directly. Jung was not being mystical in pointing this out. He observed that when consciousness expands, it begins to function according to what he termed a causal orderedness, an organizing principle beyond conventional cause and effect. This explains why awakened individuals often feel misaligned with society. They truly are. Society demands mechanical time, while they experience psychological time. Jung once described a patient, a successful engineer, who explained this tension well. During planning meetings, mapping out quarterly goals, he felt an urge to laugh, not from arrogance, but from the absurdity of it. He experienced time as fluid and alive, where unresolved past events felt more real than tomorrow's targets, where a dream carried more weight than a contract, and where a moment of genuine presence was more valuable than years of productivity. Explaining this to someone rooted in linear time is nearly impossible. How do you tell a manager that you cannot commit to a 5-year plan because you are experiencing the dissolution of time? How do you explain that rigid scheduling feels like a violation of the psyche, especially when you are beginning to follow what Jung described as the natural rhythm of individuation? This conflict between mechanical and psychological time eventually becomes intolerable. You're told to arrive at 9 a.m., even when your mind is still holding on to fragments of a dream. You're asked to move forward from grief while your inner world remains heavy with loss. You're urged to plan ahead when, in truth, your soul is being asked to stay present with what is fading away. Society's time is mechanical, but the self's time is natural. Once you shift into this organic rhythm, mechanical time can feel like confinement. If you notice these changes, the false self dissolving, no longer projecting its shadows, and feeling misaligned with the rigid pace of the external world, understand this: you're not losing your sanity. You're regaining it in a world that has lost its balance. Choosing to step away isn't defeat. It's maturing into your authentic self. Before we continue with the final two reasons awakened individuals must leave, take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications to join thousands walking this same path of transformation. Share in the comments which of these changes you're experiencing most deeply. Your openness may encourage someone else to embrace their own psychological growth. Now, the next two reasons reveal why Jung believed this departure was not merely individual, but part of a collective unfolding. Here, Jung's insight begins to feel prophetic. He understood that awakening does not stop at awareness of one's own unconscious. It extends into recognizing the unconscious layers of society itself. And with that recognition comes a profound psychological weight. Imagine suddenly perceiving the hidden shadows of others, not through judgment, but with direct clarity. You enter a room and sense grief spanning generations. You attend a meeting and detect childhood wounds behind every struggle for control. You turn on the news and see not isolated events, but recurring patterns of human behavior, what Jung described as archetypal forces manifesting on a large scale. As Jung once wrote, "The meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well. Yet, passing through this narrow door brings a sobering realization. Most people around you are still unwilling to enter it. This is not about superiority, it's about energetic strain. Once you develop what Jung described as psychological consciousness, you act like a lightning rod for the unconscious material surrounding you. The suppressed emotions, denied shadows, and unprocessed traumas of others begin to gather around your awareness. One of Jung's female patients expressed it with striking clarity. "I once believed I was simply highly sensitive. Now I realize I'm highly conscious. I don't just sense the emotions of others. I sense what they refuse to acknowledge. I carry not only my own shadow, but also the shadows of those unwilling to face theirs." It feels like being awake in a world of sleepwalkers, absorbing dreams they will never recall. This explains why many awakened individuals struggle with chronic illness, anxiety, or fatigue that medical explanations fail to capture. They are not only working through their own psychological material, they are involuntarily processing the collective unconscious of their surroundings. Jung referred to this as participation mystique, a psychological condition where boundaries dissolve and you take on what is not your own. Society not only fails to understand this weight, but often exploits it. Awakened individuals become the unspoken therapists for everyone nearby. Energy-draining personalities seek them out instinctively. Narcissists gravitate toward them, sensing a person capable of deep perception and the unconditional acceptance they desperately want. Within unconscious family systems, they are often assigned the role of the identified patient, carrying the visible symptoms of the entire system's dysfunction. And here lies Jung's essential insight: healing and integration cannot occur at the level of consciousness while surrounded by those committed to remaining unconscious. It's like trying to quit drinking while sitting in a bar. Surroundings themselves keep the condition alive. This is why isolation is not antisocial. For those who have awakened, it is a psychological necessity. What may appear to be withdrawal is, in fact, what Jung described as the transcendent function, creating space for a higher state of awareness to develop, one capable of bridging opposites and giving rise to something truly new. The fifth and final reason is perhaps the most significant. Jung's most groundbreaking idea was that within every individual lies what he termed the self. It is not the ego nor the persona, but rather the organizing center of the entire psyche, guiding one's true purpose. And here is the unsettling reality: the self's purpose does not align with society's. Society wants you efficient, obedient and constantly consuming. The self seeks wholeness, authenticity and individuation. Society it praises external accomplishments. The self values inner integration. Society defines success through accumulation. The self measures it by how much illusion has been left behind. Jung noted that once people reach a certain stage of awakening, they begin receiving what he described as demands from the self, powerful inner directives that often contradict everything considered. Rational or secure, leaving a marriage that looks perfect but feels empty, resigning from a job that pays well but drains the soul, moving somewhere that seems illogical but deeply resonates. These are not whims or midlife crises. They are what Jung referred to as the psyche's self-regulating function, the deepest wisdom steering one back to alignment. Often in bold ways, the self is not concerned with comfort. It is concerned with completion. The challenge lies here. Answering the self's call often means going against the expectations of others, your parents' hopes for you, your partner's need for stability, even your own ego's attachment to identity and status. Jung was direct about this. The greatest privilege of life is becoming your true self. Yet that privilege often feels like betrayal to those who depended on you to remain the same. One of Jung's most notable case studies described a respected doctor who repeatedly dreamed of living in a modest cabin in the mountains, writing poetry. For years he dismissed these visions as unrealistic fantasy, but over time, the dreams grew stronger, almost urgent, and eventually appeared as physical symptoms. Chest pain, without a medical explanation, and anxiety that no treatment could ease. At age 52, he gave up everything. His colleagues labeled it a breakdown, and his family attempted interventions. Jung, however, recognized this not as illness, but as the self insisting on its real life. The man spent his later years in seclusion, writing deep spiritual poetry that was eventually published after his death. He once told Jung, "I had to decide between dying as a successful doctor or living as a failed poet." The self chose life. This illustrates why many awakened individuals withdraw from society. They are drawn toward a life the world cannot fully understand, endorse, or sustain. It is not rejection of society, but acceptance of a path that requires stepping outside its terms. Jung foresaw this happening on a broader scale. He predicted that as humanity faced what he called the spiritual problem of modern man, increasing numbers would feel called to step away from collective life and explore new ways of being, not as avoidance but as growth, not as denial but as a psychological necessity. The call of the self cannot be ignored. You can postpone it, medicate it, or try to explain it away. But Jung noted that it only grows louder, more persistent, and more inventive in disrupting the life that doesn't belong to you. Illness, strained relationships, and career setbacks all are arranged by the self to release you from a path that was never truly yours. Yet here's the part many overlook in Jung's vision. He did not view this departure as an ending, but as a beginning. Leaving does not mean permanent isolation. It represents what he called the return of the transformed. Jung believed that those who awaken don't step away from society to reject it, but to transform at a depth that cannot happen while trapped in collective unconsciousness. It is like a caterpillar entering its chrysalis. The breaking down is not death, it is transformation. But you cannot become a butterfly while other caterpillars insist you stay in formation. Jung identified a pattern: individuals who accepted this leaving, completing their individuation either in solitude or within small conscious circles, eventually developed what he termed the transcendent function, the capacity to bridge the conscious and unconscious, the personal and collective, the spiritual and material. When they return, they do not rejoin society as it was. They come back as what Jung called carriers of consciousness. Their very presence sparks awakening in others, not through speeches or instruction, but through lived example. These people have integrated their shadows so fully that they no longer trigger the projections of others. They have stepped beyond linear time to such an extent that they bring true presence into every encounter. They have followed the call of the self so completely that they inspire others to listen for their own. Jung saw this as the evolutionary method of humanity. Not all awaken at once. That would bring collective chaos. Instead, individuals are drawn out, changed, and then return to plant seeds of new awareness. Each wave clears the way for the next. What appears as social collapse is, in fact, breakthrough happening slowly. Here lies the paradox Jung emphasized. You can only serve society by first leaving it. You can only heal the whole by stepping away from it. You can only share light after descending into your own darkness alone. This is not avoidance or privileged escape. It is psychological truth. You cannot offer what you do not possess. You cannot guide where you have not gone. You cannot awaken others while you remain asleep. The leaving prepares you for a different kind of return, not to blend back in, but to help give birth to what is emerging. Jung noticed the signs of this even in his time: the mental health crisis, the loss of meaning, the spiritual void despite material success. He predicted these would only intensify until enough individuals answered the call to step away, transform, and return with new awareness. We live in that intensification today. The mass departure is not collapse but evolution. Every person who chooses their self's path weakens the old system and strengthens what is coming. It may look like destruction, but that is only because we see what is ending, not what is being formed. So here is Jung's essential message. If you feel the pressing urge to leave your job, your relationship, or even your entire way of life, you are not failing, you are being summoned. The discomfort is not weakness, it is growth pushing through. The solitude is not punishment, it is preparation. Your false self must end for your real self to emerge. Your shadows must be integrated for your light to be authentic. Your tie to collective time must dissolve for your own rhythm to appear. The collective unconscious must be released for your individual awareness to thrive. And ultimately, society's agenda must fall away for your self's true purpose to unfold. Remember, the 5 transformations are not linear steps, but overlapping movements. The death of the false self, shadow integration, shifting of time, release of collective burden, and answering the self's call, all woven together into one unfolding individuation, becoming who you truly are. This path is not simple. Jung never said it would be easy. He said it would be genuine. And in a world built on illusions, authenticity becomes the greatest revolution. If you feel the call to step away, if you're already in that transition, or if you've left and are navigating uncertainty, know this: you are not alone. You are part of what Jung described as one of humanity's most vital transformations. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to join thousands of others walking this journey of change. Share in the comments what you feel called to release. Your honesty might be the encouragement someone else needs today. And remember Jung's insight: those who look outward dream, those who look inward awaken. Awakening often requires leaving behind what's outside to discover what's within. The world is waiting for who you will become through this transformation. Trust the step away. Trust the process. Trust yourself. To explore Jung's groundbreaking psychology further and what it means for your own awakening, click the recommended video on your screen now.